The morning light spilled gently through the thin curtains, casting pale patterns onto the worn floorboards. I found myself drawn instinctively to the garden, my silent refuge through years marked by sacrifice and quiet endurance. Kneeling among the roses, I felt the rough earth beneath my fingers and the fragile petals brushing softly against my skin, a reminder that even in hardship, delicate strength can survive. My hands moved methodically, a balm to my restless heart. Each bloom seemed to hold whispered secrets of resilience, carrying the weight of seasons weathered. Here, in the steady pulse of nature, I sought comfort, a small island of peace within the shifting currents of my life. I rose and walked back into the house, the scent of brewed tea mingling with the faint echo of the distant street's morning bustle. The familiar walls, once filled with laughter and shared moments, felt heavy somehow. I moved toward the small wooden box on the bookshelf where I had always kept my most important papers, the passport, birth certificate, and financial documents that represented my identity and independence. But when I opened it, I was met with emptiness. The papers were gone. An unfamiliar chill settled on my skin, the silence around me suddenly oppressive. I called out softly, "Greg? Sophie?" My voice, barely more than a whisper, tore at the quiet, but no answer came. My heart stuttered painfully as the weight of reality pressed down on me. Those papers were more than mere documents. They were the last threads tying me to a life I controlled, the proof of a self I was desperate to preserve. Sophie appeared in the doorway moments later, a face painted with practiced concern. "Mother, what are you looking for?" Her voice was soft, but the hesitation behind it was like a shadow I could almost reach out and touch. I held up the empty box. The truth hung palpable between us. "My passport, my papers, they're missing." She paused, eyes flickering away for a heartbeat too long. "Maybe you misplaced them," she said carefully, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a delicate lie, barely concealed. Before I could respond, Greg entered the room, shoulders broad but tense. His gaze skimmed over me with impatient detachment. "Mom, things like this happen when you're not as sharp. You should let us take care of this from now on." His tone was clipped, bordering on dismissive, as if I'd become an inconvenience rather than his mother. The sting of his words cut deeper than I expected. For years, I had devoted myself to their happiness and security, often at the expense of my own. Yet here they stood, orchestrating my sense of loss with thinly veiled contempt, turning what I believed was a loving family into something calculated and cold. The house that had held so many memories now felt unfamiliar, its corners shadowed by betrayal. The children whose faces I had cherished had become strangers masked beneath selfish ambition. The documents stolen from my grasp were a symbol, a quiet usurpation of my autonomy, a gesture loud in its cruelty. I sat in the silence that followed, a profound hurt settling over me. I expected outrage, tears, maybe a desperate demand for truth, but my eyes remained dry. Instead, beneath the hurt, an ember sparked, subtle yet persistent. Even as they dismissed me, I felt the slow gathering of a strength, quiet and patient. Years of tending to others had honed this strength. Sleepless nights, the weight of broken dreams, the endless sacrifices, those were not signs of weakness, but of endurance. Now that endurance was gathering power beneath the surface. I wrestled with my feelings silently, humiliation, disbelief, and grief mingling with a stubborn resolve. They thought they controlled me, that I was weakened, forgotten. They had underestimated the depth of quiet resilience that a lifetime of sacrifice could forge. My gaze returned to the empty box, tracing the rough edges of the wood as if it might give back my lost past. Each missing paper was a wound and a challenge, to reclaim what they thought could be taken without consequence. I pressed my palms to the wooden table, grounding myself in the solidity beneath my skin. This was no ordinary moment of loss, but a turning point. The garden's roses outside whispered of survival and renewal, and I told myself that I too would bloom anew, not in defiance, but in calm determination. Hours passed and the house grew still. My children, unaware of the storm quietly forming inside me, resumed their routines. But for me, the veil had lifted. I was no longer just a mother beaten by betrayal, but a woman beginning to map her path forward, step by careful step. Every glance I had caught between Greg and Sophie, each whispered conversation left just out of my hearing, now assembled into a picture of greed and deceit. It fueled the silent fire that warmed my resolve. This was not a fight to be won with anger or outbursts, but with patience honed by years of quiet observation. I had learned that power often resides in stillness, in the careful watchfulness of those underestimated. I walked to the window and looked out at the house that held a lifetime of memories, bittersweet and sharp. It was both my prison and my proving ground. Not yet free, but no longer captive. The day's last light cast long shadows across the floor, wrapping the rooms in a muted glow tinged with melancholy and possibility. I exhaled slowly and whispered once more, steady and unwavering. In silence, I found my strength. The night settled over the house with a quiet weight, wrapping around me like a cloak. In the darkened stillness, memories swelled, each one an echo of countless sacrifices made silently and without expectation of recognition. I traced the lines of those memories carefully, as if by naming each, I might summon the strength to move forward. I remembered the long, sleepless nights when my children were young and sick, the trembling hands I held, the whispered prayers against the darkness. I recalled the mornings I rose before dawn, tired but steadfast, preparing breakfast and packing lunches, pushing down my weariness so their day might be brighter. The years blurred past in these recollections, missed opportunities for myself, a career left behind, friendships faded as I prioritized their needs above all. Each sacrifice had been a choice made with love, and yet now, faced with their betrayal, those years of quiet giving seemed both a blessing and a burden. My body carried the marks of time, but my mind was clear. It wasn't bitterness that fueled me. It was the weight of a responsibility I still bore, to protect what was mine, to reclaim what had been taken under the guise of care. As dawn slowly crept into the room, I found myself speaking softly, a litany to steel my resolve. "I have given all I can," I murmured, "but this is not the end." The words settled deep in my bones. The house awoke slowly. The usual sounds filtered through, the clatter of morning tasks, conversations that felt distant like echoes through a wall. I moved quietly through the rooms, each step measured and deliberate. For the first time in a long while, I observed everything as if through a new lens. The subtle interactions, the fleeting glances, the unguarded moments that revealed hidden truths. I replayed the exchanges from the day before, each one a piece of the puzzle. Sophie's practiced concern that masked calculation, Greg's impatient authority meant to assert dominance. They believed themselves in control, but I had learned to read between the lines, to see the patterns beneath the surface. For many years, I was the one who held the family together, absorbing the shocks and shielding their vulnerabilities. Now it seemed that shield was cracked, but my spirit was unbroken. In the solitude of my room, I allowed myself a rare moment of vulnerability, tracing the faint scars along my wrists, remnants of the harder days. But in those scars, I saw proof of survival, a testament to the strength that had carried me through storms no one else bore witness to. My gaze drifted to a small photo on the bedside table, a faded image showing Greg and Sophie as children smiling with innocent joy. A pang of sadness pressed at my heart. How had we come to this point, where the children I nurtured now plotted in shadows? Yet, amidst the sorrow, a quiet fire blazed, an acknowledgement that the woman in the photo was still here, beneath the layers of hurt and fatigue. This woman would rise. I had long understood patience was more than waiting. It was an active form of strength. Now that patience would be my ally. Rage is loud but fleeting. Silence endures. In these quiet hours, I began to formulate a plan, not one born of impulsiveness or revenge, but of careful calculation and restraint. I would not confront them with accusations or anger. Instead, I would reclaim what was rightfully mine through strategy, subtlety, and skill. There had always been facets of my life preserved unseen, small savings tucked away, knowledge of financial intricacies I had quietly mastered over the decades. These were my hidden weapons, the tools I would assemble piece by piece. The thought brought a measure of comfort, a feeling that amidst betrayal, I still retained lines of power. I set aside the bitterness for a moment and allowed my mind to work like it always had, analyzing, assessing, weighing outcomes. My children's greed was their weakness. They had acted without understanding the depth of my resolve, or the quiet power forged from patience. I began to catalog what I still controlled. Memories of passwords whispered over years, the corners of folders marked secretly in notebooks long stored away, small notes hidden inside books, financial transactions I had navigated alone. These pieces would form the foundation of my reclamation. As the day wore on, I moved through the house not as a defeated woman, but as a strategist gathering intelligence. I listened carefully to the murmur of voices, noting hesitations and contradictions. Each revelation was a thread I could pull, a key to unlocking a future beyond their grasp. The silence I had once accepted as resignation now transformed into a potent force. I realized that silence was not absence, but presence, a way to observe, to understand, to prepare. I thought of the years I had been quiet, the tears shed in shadows, the laughs shared under layers of fatigue. Those quiet moments had taught me resilience. When the evening sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the floor, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My resolve hardened, not with anger, but with calm conviction. I would not allow this house to become a prison. I owed myself the freedom I had given so much to preserve. With slow determination, I whispered again. In silence, I found my strength. From that moment on, I promised myself that every step I took would be measured and deliberate, every action carefully chosen to restore what had been taken. Life had taught me many lessons, none clearer than this. Power might belong to those who shout, but true strength belongs to those who wait patiently, watch quietly, and strike with certainty. And so, with the night growing still and the world outside moving forward unaware of the quiet storm forming within these walls, I began to plan my course, silent, steady, unwavering. In this calm, I was no longer just a woman betrayed. I was the mother who would reclaim her life. Days passed with a quiet rhythm as I moved through the house like a shadow, unnoticed yet vigilant. My children believed me diminished, a woman weathered and defeated, but the truth was far different. Beneath my gentle exterior, a sharp mind was at work, weaving plans and gathering threads of information like a spider spins its web, patient and precise. The first step was clear. I had to inventory what remained mine. Though my passport and critical documents were gone, I knew the financial secrets I had guarded for years. Long ago, I began setting aside small savings, subdued and discreet, shielded from prying eyes. Those hidden reserves were my lifeline, a foundation beneath the fragile surface of apparent loss. I searched through drawers, old folders, and faded notebooks, many forgotten in the passage of time, but now critical. A worn ledger emerged, yellowed and folded, bearing handwritten notes listing bank accounts, passwords, and investments, some recorded under aliases I had created to protect my privacy. Each page stirred memories of quiet battles fought alone, late nights poring over statements, discreet conversations with bankers, cautious decisions made to secure a pocket of stability unseen by my family. My children viewed me as fragile, their arrogance blinding them to the strength I accumulated in the silence of years. I sat at the kitchen table under dim light, cross-referencing information carefully. Each figure was a fragment, every account number a clue to the future I would reclaim. Yet money alone would not secure my freedom. I needed allies, discreet and trustworthy. So I reached out to Joanna, my longtime confidant and lawyer. She was the kind of woman whose loyalty was as unwavering as her discretion was absolute. Our friendship stretched across decades, built on mutual respect rather than sentimentality. Formed through battles fought quietly and successfully. The call to Joanna was weighted with both hope and fear. When I heard her calm voice on the other end, it was as if a corner of doubt lifted. We arranged to meet in her modest office, where the faint scent of leather and old books wrapped around us like a shield against the world. I spoke carefully, outlining the situation, the loss of papers, the betrayal cloaked in familial duty, my plan to fight not with shouts or fury, but with steady, measured steps. She listened without interruption, her eyes revealing a comprehension that gave me new courage. Joanna presented a map of legal pathways, overlooked loopholes, trusts disguised beneath layers of complexity, methods to reclaim assets carefully hidden from my children's grasp. It was a landscape unfamiliar to many, but one I was prepared to navigate. She advised discretion, emphasizing that victory lay in subtlety rather than confrontation. "This is not about revenge," Joanna said softly. "It is about justice, delivered quietly and effectively." Her words became a mantra: quiet justice. With a folder of notes and legal avenues to explore, I left her office feeling lighter, as though a part of my soul had been unshackled. I knew the battle ahead required meticulous planning and patience, skills I had cultivated over a lifetime of enduring far more than I let on. At home, I began transforming sentiment and memory into capital. Jewelry once worn as gifts, trinkets amassed over years, even artwork that had caught my eye in better days, these could be sold discreetly to fund my efforts. Each item relinquished was a step toward freedom, a sacrifice made not out of despair, but determination. I set about the delicate process of crafting a new identity, a version of myself untethered from the chains wrapped around my current one. Joanna guided me through the steps: a new passport, documentation far from prying eyes, a life rebuilt quietly. The urgency was clear, but tempered with caution. Any misstep might alert Greg or Sophie. Each morning, I moved with renewed purpose through my home, noting the smallest shifts in routine, the slightest change in atmosphere that might betray my activities. Remaining invisible was imperative while laying the groundwork for escape. All the while, I collected intelligence, listening intently to the hum of conversations I overheard or glimpsed from shadows. Whispers between my children revealed cracks in their alliance, selfish motivations and disagreements. Those flaws became weapons in their own right, weaknesses I would exploit. Late into the nights, I compiled documents, gathered evidence, and conceptualized the design of my new life. The solitude that once felt heavy now brought clarity. The cloak of silence became armor, transforming loneliness into strength. I dreamt of distant cities unexplored, horizons beyond this house's suffocating walls. Europe called to me as a symbol of rebirth, a place where past burdens could dissolve beneath new skies. I imagined walking streets rich with history, my heart lighter with every step. Yet the quiet house was also the forge of my resilience. Walls that had once contained my pain now echoed with the promise of my return, stronger, not just physically, but spiritually. The more I observed, the clearer it became. Power is not held by those who shout loudest, but by those who wait patiently, survey with quiet eyes, and strike decisively. My children's arrogance was their greatest mistake. They failed to see that beneath the aging exterior was a woman whose silence was not submission, but the gathering of a storm. Plans took shape with geometric precision. I would not confront. I would not ask for what was mine aloud. Instead, each action, whether legal maneuver, financial transfer, or creation of identity, would be a quiet step on a path they could neither see nor anticipate. The night became my accomplice, providing cover as I sent emails from anonymous accounts, scheduled meetings under false names, and arranged for documents to be secured discreetly. Every detail mattered, no matter how small. The weight of years of betrayal was heavy, but, paradoxically, it fueled me. The pain sharpened my focus. The loneliness ignited determination. Some nights I smiled quietly to myself, imagining the shock on their faces when the house they controlled so blindly was rendered meaningless by my absence and my quiet triumph. Each morning's light brought fresh resolve. This was no longer escapism, but active resistance, a carefully crafted rebellion that required nothing more than patience and cunning. With each breath, I whispered that phrase I had made my own, a reminder and a promise. In silence, I found my strength. And with that whispered vow, I stepped deeper into the shadows of my plan, knowing that the road ahead demanded the full measure of my patience and resolve. Each day, my plan evolved from thought to deed, shaped by careful calculation and quiet determination. The woman my children assumed I was, fragile, fading, was fading indeed, but only to give way to someone stronger, sharper, and far more patient. In silence, I gathered the fragments of myself and mapped the path toward freedom. The first step was transforming cherished memories into currency. Late at night, I pulled out pearls given in better times, a locket holding faded photographs, and silverware worn from use and time. Each item carried memories that now felt like chains, but their value was a lifeline. I boxed them carefully and arranged discreet sales, ensuring that none of the transactions would lead back to me. There was a strange mixture of loss and liberation in each sale, pieces of my past exchanged for the promise of a different future. Yet money was merely a tool without the documents necessary to escape their control. Joanna's advice remained my guiding light as I wove through legal intricacies they could not have imagined. We arranged for a new passport, blank and full of possibilities. Every signature, every form, was a step into the unknown, carefully executed under layers of anonymity. I moved with precision, learning to calibrate my days and nights to avoid arousing suspicion. My mornings followed a pattern of quiet rituals. Evenings were dedicated to reviewing files, securing accounts, and preparing documents. I reminded myself repeatedly that patience was paramount. A single hurried move could unravel everything. Possessions that once symbolized stability became tools for escape. I sold furniture, heirlooms, paintings, all quietly converted to funds fueling my plan. The house itself was no longer a sanctuary, but a resource, its walls holding echoes of a past I was ready to leave behind. Possessions that once symbolized stability became tools for escape. I sold furniture, heirlooms, paintings, all quietly converted to funds fueling my plan. The house itself was no longer a sanctuary, but a resource, its walls holding echoes of a past I was ready to leave behind. Each item relinquished was a step toward reclaiming control, no matter how bittersweet. Greg and Sophie remained oblivious to the transformation unfolding beneath their noses. Their conversations, brimming with self-interest and veiled threats, served as a constant reminder of what I had to overcome. Their arrogance blinded them to the truth. My silence hid a fortitude far deeper than they could ever grasp. One afternoon, while sorting documents, I caught Greg's gaze, a flicker of doubt shadowing his usually confident eyes. Yet his pride restrained him. Sophie's smile, though outwardly composed, was fraught with tension. Their fortress of assumptions was riddled with invisible cracks they failed to see, cracks I would exploit. The house buzzed with false normalcy, but I saw beneath the surface. Greg played the role of the dutiful son. Sophie spun narratives to cloak their greed. Both underestimated me, unaware their mother was quietly dismantling the trap around her. In this world of silent battles, I forged a new identity, free of past pain and the toxic web of entitlement woven by those I once trusted. Regret and bitterness had no place here, only strategy and resolve. One night, under the soft glow of my bedside lamp, I laid out the final plans. Documents ready, funds secured, escape routes mapped, identity forged, everything aligned. It was a moment of profound clarity, an acknowledgement of the rebirth my silence had wrought. A quiet smile curled on my lips as I envisioned stepping into a world untouched by manipulation, a world offering breadth and space. Freedom was no longer a distant hope, but an impending reality. With legal battles won in the shadows, Joanna's skills surfaced assets hidden by years of deceit and entitlement. Each unraveling thread strengthened my hand. Justice was taking form, not loud and spectacular, but firm and undeniable. Through it all, I moved with calm detachment. Emotions lay beneath a veneer of composure, carefully controlled. This was not a moment for vulnerability, but for steady precision, a whispered force growing in strength. My children's visits became masks behind which I staged meetings with Joanna, sent coded messages, and shuffled documents. The house was a stage where my silent revolution played out unseen. Timing held everything. I studied the rhythms, when voices softened, when feet hesitated, when distraction offered a fleeting window, and struck with quiet efficiency. I slipped like a shadow, unseen but potent. When the time came, I began transferring funds to accounts under my control. Each small, secret transaction was a thread unraveling their grip, a quiet triumph fueling my resolve. Possessions sold increased, the pile of funds mounting without rousing suspicion. My financial landscape shifted quietly, profoundly. The house softened its hold, transforming from prison to bridge. Finally, I arranged my departure, tickets purchased under an alias, luggage packed with careful secrecy, neighbors none the wiser. The path to freedom was near, and each logistical step became a heartbeat closer to liberation. Late one evening, I stood at the window, gazing at a street I had known all my life. My heart pounded with a blend of fear and exhilaration. The home of memories and betrayals now bore witness to my quiet ascent. The horizon shimmered, fragile but promising, a new chapter waiting to be written. With every deep breath, I reaffirmed my commitment. In silence, I found my strength, I whispered, the words now carved deep within. What remained was the final step, stepping into the freedom I had so painstakingly forged, ready at last to claim my life. The day Greg and Sophie returned home was cloaked not in tension, but in a veneer of normalcy, a false calm masking the storm about to unfold. Their footsteps echoed with confidence, voices light but rehearsed, assuming I remained the fragile woman they had tried to cage. They expected to find me vulnerable, uncertain, an easy target to confront about the missing documents. Instead, they walked into a transformed presence, a calm that held the fury of years softened into unshakable strength. I sat poised in the sitting room, the familiar quiet wrapping around me like armor, each breath steady, deliberate, as though preparing for a duel fought not with words, but with the power of being. When the door opened and they stepped inside together, their synchronized front could not mask the flicker of uncertainty that passed between their faces. I met their gazes unwaveringly, and there it was, the first crack in the armor of their certainty. Greg was first to speak, his voice sharp but laced with disbelief. "Mother, we need to address the documents. This standoff can't go on. You must let us take control, because you're no longer capable." His words rang with authority, an attempt to reassert dominance veiled thinly by supposed concern. Sophie nodded beside him, her smile sweet but strained, a practiced display masking urgency. "We only want your safety, Mom. You have to trust us to manage your affairs." Calmly, I rose, feeling the years of silent endurance crystallize into purpose. From a drawer hidden in plain sight, I retrieved a yellow envelope, the weight of it far heavier than its paper cover suggested. I placed the new passport and plane tickets on the table, their blank pages a promise of freedom. Their surprise was immediate and undeniable. Greg's clenched jaw betrayed his shock. Sophie's face tightened as pride wrestled with fear. "I've made my arrangements," I told them softly but firmly, "and I am leaving." The words hung in the air, unfurling like a banner of liberation. "This house, your attempts to cage me within these walls, mean nothing now." Greg's voice lowered, a threatening undertone emerging. "You can't just walk away from your family. This is your home." I met his gaze with quiet fire. This was my home long before it became a battlefield controlled by greed. I am no longer your prisoner. I am free. Sophie stepped closer, desperation seeping through her composure. "Think about the family, Mother. Think about what you're abandoning." I spoke with quiet finality. "I leave behind a house built on lies and betrayal. I choose dignity over deceit and freedom over control." Their silence was a confession. The certainty they wore had crumbled beneath the weight of a truth they had refused to see. They had misjudged me, mistaken silence for submission, patience for weakness. But beneath the still surface was a tempest they never knew was brewing. The air tightened with newfound tension, the house itself bearing witness to this shift. I stepped toward the door with deliberate grace, each movement an assertion of autonomy. They followed me with eyes wide, caught between holding on to control and sinking beneath inevitable defeat. Before walking out, I left them with one last declaration, a quiet but piercing truth. You underestimated me. The door closed softly behind me, a whispered end to a chapter marked by pain and manipulation. Outside, the world awaited, vast, uncertain, filled with promise. As I stepped into its expanse, I felt the weight of years lifting, chains broken by the patience honed in silence. No longer victim, no longer prisoner, simply free. Each step away from that house shed the burdens of betrayal, replaced by a renewed embrace of self and strength. The future was untrodden, its shadows and light a mystery met with courage. In the depths of that liberation, I whispered once more. In silence, I found my strength. That day, silent power moved mountains, resilience shaped destinies, and freedom was claimed not with noise, but with the steady unfoldment of resolve. The plane hummed softly beneath me, rising steadily away from the ground that cradled so many memories, some painful, others bittersweet. Outside, the clouds swept past like blurred brushstrokes, obscuring the familiar world below and unveiling, in their place, a new horizon. I watched as the landscape grew smaller, a mosaic of streets, gardens, and windows that had once echoed with laughter and later silence. Each fading detail felt like a stitch being cut from the fabric of my former life. Ahead lay Europe, a place I had never known, yet already inhabited by dreams. In my mind's eye, I saw narrow cobblestone streets basking in morning light, cafes where strangers gathered to share stories, quiet corners where a woman might find respite from past burdens. The promise whispered in those images offered a balm on the raw edges of my soul. My suitcase was lighter than it had been for years, carrying only essentials and a few cherished mementos. Among them were small tokens of my resilience, an old photograph, a delicate scarf, a faded letter tucked between pages that whispered to me of strength born in the quiet corners of my life. These were my line to the past, not chains to bind me. When the plane touched down, a shiver of anticipation coursed through me. The airport was a symphony of voices and footsteps, foreign yet welcoming, a gateway to a life rebuilt on my terms, far beyond the reach of the shadows I had left behind. Securing my new home was a simple ritual, keys to an apartment that breathed light through tall, arched windows, casting patterns on walls unmarked by pain or betrayal. The air inside was filled with quiet potential, a blank canvas awaiting the brushstrokes of a new beginning. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the unfamiliar softness beneath me, and let the weight of the journey settle. The years of endurance, the masked tears, the silent victories, all coalesced into a tapestry of survival that draped over my shoulders like armor. Thoughts of Greg and Sophie surfaced, mingling sorrow with relief. The bonds that once defined family had frayed beyond repair, yet I carried no bitterness. Instead, there was peace, a gentle acknowledgement that sometimes love means letting go. In this space, I was no longer defined by stolen papers or whispered schemes. Instead, I was defined by reclaiming voice and agency I had long sacrificed. The silence I once bore as a burden transformed into a source of power, steady and unyielding. The twilight sky deepened outside my window, stars beginning to prick the dark like distant fires. I gazed upward, feeling the vastness of the universe settle around me. Life, in all its complexities, stretched ahead, a mosaic of challenges and possibilities. I breathed deeply and whispered the mantra that had carried me through storm and stillness alike. In silence, I created my liberation. Each day ahead held the promise of discovery, of quiet joys and hard-won peace. I was ready to face it, not as a woman broken by betrayal, but as one renewed by resolve. And so, with the soft glow of night wrapping around me, I closed my eyes and embraced the new life unfolding beyond the horizon, a life crafted in silence, strength, and hope.